Welcome to Sacred, the podcast that invites you to reclaim your intuition, resist exploitive systems, and remember the love that brought you to teaching and caregiving in the first place.
We're your hosts,
Angela Carolina Garcia
and Lauren Staubel. Join us on a rough and tumble journey of reckoning and transformation. Hey listeners, today we have a special guest with us who is a fellow healing-centered educator, Dr. Sanayi Beckles-Canton. She's founder of the Chloe Day School and Wellness Center, which is a progressive, trauma-informed early childhood program and summer arts camp, and a Reggio inspired school that believes in diversity and inclusion. Also, we just learned that she's parent of 6 sons, and that parenting journey has really informed the work that she does. And before we get started with our conversation, as usual, let's get grounded. So wherever you are, you can find yourself with your, sitting or standing or lying down, and just take a moment to feel that however you are. If you want to change how you are, then go ahead and do that. Get comfortable, unless you're driving, and keep doing what you're doing. Keep your eyes on the road. And just, wherever you decided to be, standing or sitting or lying down, just feel your breathing. Feel your breathing in and out. And then if that just feels good to be present with your breath exactly as it is, just keep that. And if you, like me right now, we're approaching the beginning of the school year. If you have lots of thoughts like banging around in your brain like I do, see if you can kind of rest your brain down a little bit. And if you feel yourself kind of grasping or grabbing onto those thoughts, see if you can release the grasp even just a little bit. Couldn't matter less how much you let go, but see if you might just relax the brain down, release any thoughts that are moving. You don't have to make them go away. Just kind of release your attention to them a little bit. And then turn your attention back to your breathing. And feeling the breath in and out. And as you're ready, coming back into this shared space, this shared sacred space, and maybe if you're in a space with other people, making eye contact with them, smiling maybe, or keeping your eyes closed if that feels right too. And we will officially welcome Dr. Canton. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Or whatever time you're listening to it, anybody.
Yes. I usually like to just get grounded. I usually take myself off screen and just kind of center. So I thank you for that grounding moment.
So first, we would love to hear from you. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear. Tell us your journey. How did you come to be the founder of Chloe Day School, or any other aspect of your story that you want to share with us?
So in 2018, actually in 2009, in my prayer time and work, I had sort of felt like I was at a crossroad. I had been working in education, doing a lot of social service work. I also was a youth pastor in my community doing work, and found myself a little bit despondent about young people. I had worked with youth who were in gangs or experienced trauma and real traumatic experiences within the public school system. And I decided I was going to go back to school. And I said, I really want to go back and get licensed as a social worker. Part of my job as a youth pastor, I had to get my master's degree to be ordained. And so in going back to school, they had a program that allowed me to do a master's in social work and a master's in divinity. And so one of the things I found working with the youth in my church is oftentimes if they needed psychotherapy or more intense counseling, I would find a place to send them, but maybe in a month or two, they would be back in my office. like, can I just stay with you? Can I just do more therapy with you? I would, normally do 3 to 5 sessions because that was the level of training I had at the time. And then I would really, if they really needed more therapy, I would find a much more trained clinician for them. But they always found their way back to my office. So when I decided to go back to school, I said, well, oftentimes my young people don't want to go to a psychotherapist, and particularly in the Black and Brown community, we struggle with mental health because we often have these stigmas, that I'm crazy or something's wrong with me. And so that also could impede young people's ability to want to open up and get the support they needed. And so I went back to school and said, okay, I'll do social work so that one can get the training that if I choose to stay with my clients, I can stay with them or, pass them along. But I wanted to focus in trauma because I felt that was a common thread among particularly children of color and families of color, that somewhere in their journey, trauma was a part of their experience, whether it was generational or whether it was just experiences or vicarious, right? Sometimes it's not always their own experience, but things they've seen or in their community. And so that's when I indulged in the work and wanted to bring a spiritual part to it, that I realized that there was something bigger than just me and the way I lived making this thing called life happen. And I wanted to find ways to better understand that and to help and support young people. And so that journey started it. And it was during that time of seeking and trying to center my own self that for me as a Christian, God gave me this vision for schools and said, you would kind of work with people in open schools and try to rethink how we do education. And so when I finished, I decided that, you know what? A lot of the issues I see with these teenagers and middle schoolers could really be resolved if we got parents at an early age, right? If you got families when children just started coming in and really talked about that spiritual part of who children are and that social emotional part of who children are, maybe these problems that I'm facing in counseling with teenagers could be changed. And so I decided to go into early childhood education. And that started my journey in 2009. And having sons who also had different variations and was blessed to go to some really good schools, public schools as well as private schools. I always had a feeling of, why do we have to pay so much for this? Right? Why are all the good programs either very expensive or hard to get into? Why can't someone in their community just get served in their community? And that sort of birthed my work of beginning to do policy work and joining the school board in my community to advocate for better public schools in the Harlem community. And so throughout the years of advocating and working within the system around policies and how do we make quality schools and being a part of different think tanks about that at a time when charter schools were kind of blowing up and going off the charts and trying to understand this new concept, I had offered to or agencies I had worked with, which I worked with a few large Head Start programs and community-based early childhood programs. And what I had found was that oftentimes I would advocate for families and staff workers. And because I was an executive, I was often shunned. Like, you're supposed to be on our side. Why are you advocating for these different things for them? And so between the policy work I did volunteering in my community and my day job working for Head Start programs, I said, you know what? I can do this myself. I keep looking for someone else to do the thing that I see a need for a change, but I'm looking for others to change, and maybe I'm the person that needs to do it. And so I had worked on some thinking about schools, had visited a few private schools and learned about what they were doing. And then I went to the school board in the community I lived in and said, you know what? I think we need to open a progressive trauma-informed preschool. And at the time, I couldn't really get schools to pick up on it because, progressive education can be this very elusive thing for people because it's child-centered, it takes the focus off the teacher, it takes the focus off of data and numbers, and it really just let kids show up. And then when you start talking about mental health and trauma, people want that, but they don't really want that. And so in 2018, the Bill de Blasio administration had took over early childhood education in New York City and began to change the landscape. And they put out an RFP and were looking for new programs, and that was the birth of Chloe Day School. So I went to a few different individuals I had worked with in different agencies and said, I'm thinking about doing this thing. Would you come work with me? And between the teachers that I had encountered throughout my journey in education and the other executives I had worked with, myself and three other women came together, and one was a teacher, one was an operations and administrative director I worked with, and one was my mentee who was also in social work. And I said, I'm going to open this school and we're going to do this thing and really change early child education. And people thought I was crazy at first. How are you going to create a free program with such quality? Where are you going to get the money? How are you going to do this? And then the question became, would I become a nonprofit or for-profit, right? And so I ended up becoming an LLC or MWB, which is like a Black-owned business, to get the contract to the city. Because the nonprofit way, there were so many requirements, like the federal requirements. You have to have audits. You have to have all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't have those things. We were just starting. And I was blessed that the New York City Department of Education took a chance with me and these four women and said, okay, you want to start this program? Let's see what this thing is about. And that's how the school was birthed. The Wellness Center was a part of the program that I insisted on having. It's called the Healing Space. And it's really just a part of the school that we use to educate our community on mental health. Because I know in Black and Latino communities, we don't really understand mental health, and we're very much, I think in some aspects, afraid of it, right? To really talk about it. But just because we're afraid of it doesn't mean it doesn't show up in our homes, right? Whether it's with our children, our nieces, our nephews, our parents, at some point, depression may show up, or schizophrenia may show up, or some other mental health illness that needs care. And because we don't like to deal with the stigma, often we get poor care. And so I use the Wellness Center as a space to let other agencies come in and do workshops, monthly workshops on different mental health. As a clinician, I also ran a grief group right after COVID. We just had a lot of people dealing with grief. And so we would just hold space. We would do meditation. We would talk about what they were feeling. And then during COVID, I used the healing space to create a midnight mindfulness. Because what I found was at midnight, myself and a lot of people were not sleeping. And so I went on Facebook one night and said, am I the only one up at 12 o'clock and can't sleep and feel anxious? And I had about 50 people say, me too. So wow. I created a support group, a mental health support group, and it was called Midnight Mindfulness. And we would come on at 12 midnight, we would meditate, and we would just hold space for 45 minutes for each other. And we did that for 3 years during the entire pandemic. And then as things opened up, less people came to the group. And I said to them, I think we're all ready to go back, right? I don't think therapy is something we need for a lifetime. We just sometimes need it for a time. And so that's what the healing space or the wellness piece of the program is about. It's really about educating families about wellness and mental health wellness, and then allowing space for people to understand what it is and explore treatment if necessary or ways to deal with their variation of whatever sort. And then we also have workshops on development for families, understanding early childhood education, understanding kids' development, what is a typically normally developing child versus a kid who may have sensory issues or autism or all these different things. And so we twice a month, we offer workshops during the school year to the community and our parents, just on mental health and wellness. And so that's basically how the school was created. The beautiful thing about Chloe was, though it may be four of us who found it, it's really a community program. And because my elected officials sort of helped me, they helped me find funding to renovate the space. The city also helped and, gave us the funding to run the program. And we really look at it as something the churches in our community gave us the space, right? The space we use is owned by St. Philip's Church in Harlem. And so I feel like it's something that the community is a part of in different ways. And so though I may own it and run it, I don't really take full ownership because I really feel like this is a community project, or a community experiment, as I often call it. Right? So
what you were describing, thank you so much for sharing that story. I've only heard little, bits and pieces about Chloe Day School. It's really lovely to hear the journey to get there. Part of it reminded me of like transitions. Angela and I do teach about transitions as healing spaces. But even just your healing space as almost like right? Sometimes we need more care than we're ready for. And even just thinking about that, like it's a space to kind of it's a transition to care. But that in itself is like, well, wait, what is my resistance to care? Getting to know, like, that's valid. that transition sounds like it would be profoundly healing. Even just suppose somebody never even makes it to a deeper level of care, but that transition space, it seems like I'm very inspired, at least right now, after learning about that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing it. I'm here listening and I'm like, oh, my whole body feels so calm right now. It's very like, oh, it can happen. Community spaces that support each other. And beautiful. It sounds beautiful. So thank you. Thank you for sharing and for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's very different. Just even employing people to the work. I always often tell them, like, it's not a normal space. So, it's not what you typically would see in schools, where we're really trying to do something sort of that hasn't been done for children. And, it's amazing the fruits of it. Like, as a woman of color and a child of persons who really worked in civil rights, when you hear Martin Luther King's speech about he had a dream that all kids one day will kind of, regardless of your race or background, that they will kind of see each other and can be together. For our February Black History play, our kids, when we think about the Reggio Emilia model and it being child-centered, the teachers had taught kids about different Black inventors and about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. And our 3 and 4-year-olds came up with the idea that they wanted to do a play for their parents on the Montgomery boycott, right? So we said, okay, so y'all going to do a bus? They said, we want to make a bus and we want to do Rosa Parks. And so the teachers worked with the kids. But what was amazing is one of our students, his name is Emmett, and he is Caucasian. He's blonde head, blue eyes. He was Martin Luther King. He chose to be Martin Luther King. And it was the cutest thing for him to come in and, they're on the bus and Rosa Parks calls him on her play phone, like, I'm in jail. And he's like, we're coming to get you, Rosa. And he has his picket signs. And I'm like, wow, who could have imagined in 2023 that I would have a white kid in my class playing Martin Luther King? And he got his picket sign. And he said to the teacher, I don't want to be the bus driver. I want to be Martin Luther King, right? At 3, right? And so that sense of inclusion and so racial justice. And, for me, it was like, oh my God, look at the fruits of the work. When you have this 3-year-old go home and him and his family explore who Martin Luther King is. He brings his collage and then he plays the role reenacting this little historical moment, and it was the cutest thing to see. And it filled me with the potential of what we can do with education, right? If we let kids really explore themselves and feel comfortable and feel good about being in their own bodies. And even those hard things, right? Something as hard as that. Taking it and making it in a way where kids can learn and feel good about the learning, for me was powerful.
Yeah. I think I'm remembering my last time that I was in, maybe it wasn't the last time. I don't actually remember. I was teaching in a Reggio classroom, and we also made a play, and it wasn't any historical moment, but I'm just thinking about those babies now, as you mentioned the play. But I want to tap a little bit into, you mentioned like finding staff and how do we support them or bring them in. And I think in our current context, there's a lot of conversations about, I don't think I know. The other day I heard someone say like, we're in a staffing desert in certain parts of the country. And there's a part of me that understands that we need staff that needs to know how to care for babies and support families. And there's another part of me that's like, Spirit, God, universe, like give me the strength as the leader to be able to hold the space for these teachers to learn. That was like a space where I sat when I was working in the last school I was at, like, well, I need these people to come in because I need bodies in the classroom, but like they're gonna need a lot of support. So like maybe like so I'm wondering a little bit of how do you play in that middle space? How do you nourish yourself?
I function the same way you do, right? I pray for everything, right? And it's funny because we are a New York City public school, and right, church and state are separate, right? And so I don't impose my beliefs on anyone, but I just believe that spirit is really important, right? It really is important, and we all call spirit different things, right? But even before we did our play, right, my teachers were shocked because I turned and said, okay, before we go out, I got to pray. So, I would pray. and Department of Education, I'm like, do you want to grab hands too? So the lady's like, okay, I guess I'm getting in the prayer too. And my teachers was like, you're going to pray with DOE in the building? And I'm like, we're going to pray because the kids are about to go out and perform, and we need our ancestors. We need everyone to be in the room with them, right? I believe that. And so, I give libations, I give my ancestral prayer to be with the little people as they go out and perform for their parents. And we had an amazing show. And so afterwards, I said to my staff, we have to believe that there's something bigger and the support is there, the guides, whatever you choose to call them. And so, yes, it is a desert, right? And so today we have 2 weeks to school start, and I struggle to hire staff, right? Because you want people who can support kids. My biggest thing in looking for a staff person is, do they have the heart or the spirit? They may not have all the experience I need, and I can train that and send them to train that. But if you don't have the heart or the desire to connect with these little spirits, then it's going to be a hard year, right? And it's going to be very hard to do anything for them or yourself. And so it is a deficit, because I think coming out of COVID, it changed people. I feel like it changed us as a society, and how we relate to one another. And technology has changed us, right? And so because of that human connection that we used to have because we didn't have technology, right? If I wanted to go outside as a little kid and play, I would have to walk up to you and say, "Hi, my name is such and such. Can we play together?" And that's how we met friends when I was a kid. Today, my son can get on a computer and talk to people in other countries and never know who they are and never see their humanity. Right? And so that socialization and personal thing that we build, and energy that we connect to when we physically meet and physically engage, has disintegrated. So when you work in early child education, you need that. And so because people have been checked away from it so long, I think it's harder for teachers to come in and say they're going to be fully present with kids. They're like, "Oh, I need a paycheck. I got to pay my bills." And that's their motivation, not that I want to come in and change lives. And so I have to constantly, when I'm meeting with people, to employ them like, so what's your life vision for you? How do you think you can support these little minds or these little spirits? And they're like, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." And I realize that a lot of times people are looking for a paycheck. They're looking to get paid. And usually, for me, I realize early child education can be low-hanging fruit. Oh, they're just a bunch of kids. Put them in a room. You just change them, keep them quiet. They'll be fine. And not realize that it's more to meeting their needs than just meeting the physical needs. And so like you, I need a person in the room, but I also need a person who's going to spiritually show up. They may not always have all the skills needed, right? Because we can teach those things, but I can't teach compassion. I can't teach being intentional. I can't teach being present, or patient or kind. Either you have those things or you don't. And I think educators need those things, especially when you're dealing with younger children, because they don't see all the drapings of life. They're just like, like Emmett said, "I don't want to be the white man on the bus, Dr. Cantor. I want to be Martin Luther King." Like, he was just frank about it. Like, don't choose me for that because I fit the description. I want to do something different, right? And so if I didn't have a heart, I would say, "But I need a bus driver." Right? And you may be one of two other Caucasian kids in the room, but I was like, "Okay, Emmett, all right, I see you. I hear you. So let's rethink this. So maybe my bus driver can be Black. He doesn't have to be the white kid," right? Emmett is saying, we're switching roles here, right? We're changing history, we're making history the way we want to make history here, right? So, but if I didn't have a heart for that, I would have kind of wanted to stay within the lines of what we know. And I think that part you can't get. And I think we're going to continue to have a shortage in teachers if we continue to lack the compassion and empathy for the work, right? And I think that's a societal problem, right? And it happens at all levels because we don't pay our teachers well. So there's a level of disrespect in that, right? That has been systematic for so long. And so people looking at that profession are like, why go there and be less paid and disrespected?
Yeah.
I don't want that no more, right? People tend to want peace nowadays, and people don't want to be mistreated or be, the other thing COVID did too, let people know that, do I have to really work 8 hours a day?
Right.
Yeah.
Can I still get the work done and do it in less time and have more free time for things that I want to do? Right.
Yeah.
And so that also has impeded our education system because we need someone to be with kids 6.5 hours. And it's getting people to commit to that is also a challenge, right?
Yeah.
And so, like you, I struggle with it, but I think I connect to, I meditate a lot. I try to pray. I try to find good people, and oftentimes the universe will send them my way. And then other times I'll meet them, I'm walking on the park side and they're like, hey, is this a school? I had a man walk in and he said, are you guys hiring? And I'm like, you might be my answered prayer. Okay, come give me your resume. Right? You looking for something, I'm looking for something. Maybe the energy attracted us. And he turned out to be a person that I ended up hiring. He couldn't do full time, but I said, let's just see what life brings us, right? And so that's how I kind of do it. I kind of open up to let God, the universe, whatever you may call it, guide it. And I find when I do it that way, it works a lot better than me trying to meet the quotas and the lines of what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. I recently started sitting a lot with like the spirit provides.
Yes.
The spirit provides, and they or he or she or it does. It's so funny. The other day I was actually at Lauren's house and I was on my way to Great Barrington to go to an event with Bayo Kumalafe, and in my like automatic brain, because I like suddenly like was like texting and this is terrible, nobody should do it, but I was looking at my phone and I was driving because I was like signing up for work and I needed to get paid and it was all due in a few minutes. So I ended up going to the highway, like bringing me back to Boston instead of Great Barrington. And I didn't even realize it. And then all of a sudden the light for gas turns on. And there's an exit in Chicopee that I got off and like was like, if I would have gone to Great Barrington like the right way, I would have been. There's no stop till you get to Great Barrington between Lawrence Space and all the way over there. And like I wasn't even paying attention, and the spirit was taking care of me. And like in a lot of ways, it would have been like, why am I not paying attention? Or maybe I just don't even go. I should just go to Boston, right? Like that could have been this other reaction. But the more that I'm just like, oh, that's just what needs to be. Or like, that's just what it was. Like, even if I could have controlled it, right? Like, even if I was paying attention. But it sort of is like, if I don't know, my body is just like, I don't have to control it. Actually, I don't have any control over it.
Nothing.
And the more like release that happens in my own like way of being in relationship with the tensions that come up, is like, oh, like we can like be like floating together. Like we don't need to be in rigidity.
Yes.
Yeah, we just recreate the same thing when we. Right, like I'm thinking about the story that you just shared of Emmett, and right, like so many problematic things could possibly have come out of that. But that's not the point. The point is to support babies developing a sense of agency and finding who they are in relationship to what they're learning. And when we like release ourselves from data collection and norms and all of these like boxy things that we have to do because all of a sudden we have power of some sort, then it sort of creates this other kind of way of writing history, like you said.
There have been a few like seeds planted that are kind of leading us, I think, to our first question, if y'all are ready to play there. Dr. Canton, you brought up ancestors in terms of like thinking, praying, preparing the children, right? We need their ancestors here in order to do this. So our first question, and really is kind of about discernment, right? And even you talked about, okay, this person walked in doesn't mean I'm just going to be like, oh, you walked in, sure, here's a job. You're like, you walked in, let's figure out, you discern, are we going to continue moving forward, right? And even that like discernment of, I always tell my students when they come to class the first day, they're early childhood education students, you're here because your heart won't let you be somewhere else. That's the reason you're here. It's not for the pay, because we know it's not even to get a bathroom break every 4 hours. You're here because your heart won't let you do something else.
Yes.
We're like in that discernment process. How might we tap into ancestral knowledge rather than reinforce survival mechanisms that are no longer serving us? Because, right, this is a specific time compared to our ancestors' time. And, I keep thinking in the healing-centered world, we keep talking about, like whatever they did means we're here today. And so we don't know where the children are going to be in the future. But so in this moment, how do we tap into ancestral knowledge? And then how do we distinguish between an urge to survive and a move to thrive? I'm thinking about that.
Yeah. So, for me, one of my mentors, she's in her late 80s, and she introduced me, took me back to Africa, and I go in the summers to Ghana with her and learn more about my history. And one of the things I had learned, I went doing the 2019 project, 16-19. So we went in 2019, and I went to a village, and one of the queen mothers there, when we came, it was myself and a few other women who were from America. We were born here, and she kept in her native language calling for us. And when I'd asked the guy, what is she asking? She's saying, bring the stolen ones to me. And I said to her, what does she mean with the stolen ones? And so when we came, she's hugging and rubbing our face, and she's crying. And she said to me, oh, the ancestors brought you back. Mm. You let me know that they were okay. Because if you're here, that meant they made it there safe. Right? That in spite of all what they went through, that they survived because you're the offspring. And so every time you come back, you let us know that the ones who were stolen from us, they survived in some sort of way. And as we went to the castle where slaves, my ancestors, were taken away, and we went through the door of no return and all those different things. One of the conversations that I learned was, she said, when they took you, they took the best of Africa. They took the strongest, the most resilient, because to make it across those seas and those conditions, you had to be strong. You had to be resilient. And so their spirit is always with you and you. They're in your cells. They're pushing you along. And that was my first understanding of ancestors, that there were things that was forces working. And so I've learned to still myself and really look for the signs. One of the things she says, when you ask for help from the ancestors, you have to look for it. You can't just ask for help and then just think it. You have to look for the signs. And so the signs were the ways. So if I prayed like you, like, oh God, I need a teacher. I'm still struggling to find a teacher. Can you please help me find a teacher? I would speak it into the universe, and then whether I'm walking or somewhere and someone's like, oh, do you know someone? I'm like, okay, well, maybe you are the answer to the request I made. And then you kind of go with it, because the thing about it is, if you need to know the answer of everything, you're really going to get nothing, because you're not going to do anything. Because oftentimes the things we really need comes in bits and pieces. You might get one step, and if you don't take that step, you don't get the next step. And so a person who needs to have the whole picture in advance often is not in a space of discerning. And I think for me, I am learning better as I get older how to do that, how to sit with myself, sit in this body I'm in and say, okay, we are all connected to something. You know, as a kid, my mother would send me places and say, listen, you are Miss Betty's child. So when you go in the world, don't go do nothing crazy because you belong to this person, right? And so it was always that reminder that I was connected to somebody, that I wasn't just my own person in the world. And so when I see my children in my school, I understand that they too are connected to someone's. They're maybe Miss Jones's granddaughter or someone who before them have done some work in the world. And whether they're still here or not, we're all connected to something. And so it's when you can tap into that. But again, it takes you to patience. It takes those things that you really cannot learn. You have to kind of live them. You know, my mother said, if you ask for patience, you're going to stand on long lines. You're going to wait for things, because that's the only, you can only develop it. So I tell you, I don't pray for patience because I don't want to stand on long lines. Right. But if you want to be a kind person, you might have to experience some unkind things to know what kindness look like, or be put in a position where you may have to give something to someone who was unkind to you. Right. That's how you learn those things. And so I think in education, we often want that rigidity of making things so data driven and so matter of fact. But much of life is not matter of fact. You know, it's kind of this thing that you really can't grab and hold. You just kind of got to go with the flow of it. And when we do that in education, I think kids learn better, right? When we create those spaces where money is not driving what we do, or the lack of funding doesn't drive what we do. Kids are allowed to really grow and make room for all of who they are. But that requires educators to be, you know, really present with themselves. You know, that's what I really loved about going to the Acosta Institute, really focusing on you, right? And I often tell my teachers, if you're not clear about who you are, why you're here, and what you're trying to give, then this is going to be hard work. But if you're really clear about who you are and what you want to give and what your connection is that you want to gain from this experience with these children, then this is going to just be fun. Yeah. Right? And so you'll get paid for having fun versus being paid for having work. Right. But you know, my first day at PD with my staff, it is all in centering them in themselves. We do no work around the work. It is about who you are, why you're here, what do you want, and what do you want to understand about these spirits that we are being blessed to be in exchange with for some time. And then we'll go into all the, you know, you got to make sure you don't lose a kid, and make sure make sure you have all the mechanics of what they require so you can get a paycheck. Right? But we start with them because I think that's the most important thing. And if most schools did that, right, I think you would have people more willing to teach. Because I always say to my teachers, the first thing I say is, I want you to think back to the earliest grade. For me, I can think back to kindergarten, and I can still see Miss Kessler walking through the door with her fat, rosy face, her red hair, and her glasses, and saying, "Good morning, class." I can still see my kindergarten teacher. 50. That's the impression she left. Right? That 50 years later, I can still see her. Now, I may not remember all the things I learned, but I remember she was warm, she was kind, she was nice. And then I make them think about that teacher that wasn't so nice. I think about my fourth grade teacher who was just mean, and he was bitter, and he had been teaching too long, and it just showed up, and he didn't care. And he would often say, "I have mine, you got to get yours." Right? And you didn't really understand what that means, but you know, he said, "I have my education. You got to get yours. So if you don't want to sit down and listen, then get out my classroom," right? And He didn't care if he was hungry. He didn't care if he was tired. He didn't care if you had went through anything. And so I said to her, teachers are important. They make a lasting impression. And so I know sometimes the work doesn't feel like you're getting recognized for it. But I promise you, years later, that child will remember you and remember what you did for them and what you gave them. And I think for me, that's more than a paycheck, right? Those so much more. But again, it's a value system. It's what you value. If you just value money, then that's going to mean nothing to you. If you just want to get your bills paid and survive, as you talk about, that won't work. But if you want to thrive, the thriving really comes in that spiritual connection to all of what's around you. And you being aware of it, and not just teaching, and
this is reminding me of what your mommy said, Angela, at the end of last. I just pulled up the quote because I wanted to read her words. Is that okay?
Of course.
She said, "To like and to love are two different things. If you want to go into the field of early childhood education, you really have to have the passion. When you love something, you get up every morning knowing it's going to be a new day." So,
yeah.
important. And there's a reason we show up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started like my teaching journey, I think I was like 4 or 5 when I just knew I was going to be a teacher, and everyone around me knew it. And so they all just sort of, I don't know if like they molded me or maybe they just cared for me to be able to continue in that path. And I think when I was doing my like undergrad, or when I went to college and was like, why do you want to be a teacher? And I was like, because I get to talk all the time. And I actually like to talk a lot, actually. But that was like the reason why I was doing it. And I was doing elementary education. And then along the ways, I ended up in early childhood and got my master's in early childhood. And it was in that journey where it was like, I'm so tired of talking, actually. I don't want to be a teacher that talks. But I sometimes think it's like I think of thriving and surviving and what you were just saying about you have to be connected to something more powerful than you to be thriving. I think a lot of what happens in spaces, and even like when there's like professional development opportunities, it's always like, how do I like give me the tool that I need so that family knows why I'm teaching their child this thing. The other day I was doing a recording, and I went to ask the teachers if they had any very specific questions that they would like me to address in the workshop that was being recorded, and it was on supporting English language learning families. And the teacher said something along the lines of, I would like to know how to make sure that the parent is understanding what I'm saying. And I said a lot of other things. And then I was like, I think you're asking the wrong question. I think the question is, how do I feel calm about the fact that I don't know if that person is understanding me because we speak 2 different languages? And her face did a thing, and I think she sat with it, and I hope she's still sitting with it if she chooses to. But I think a part of working in this specific field, knowing that there isn't a lot of money and knowing that there is a mindset of scarcity within the programming and the design of early childhood education, that we also have to know ourselves very well to then be able to be like, it's not about me. And knowing that it's this other thing, it sort of like sustains you, because I am very happy to go to a job for 6 hours where I can play with babies and feel so filled, and then like maybe go do some extra hours on the side doing something that's actually kind of boring where they pay me more. Like, right, like when we think of the way we think of time and like how we spend 6 hours a day with kids, or like that's what schools need, or programming needs. Those are things that are coming up to me in the way that we reframe our relationship with
Yes.
work. Yeah. I think that leads us a little bit into one of our other questions.
Mhm.
How do we remember, envision, cultivate, and play in a third space? And I bring that one up because I think we're talking a little bit about play and a
Mhm.
little bit about our own need to play to be able to be in these spaces. Um,
You said, how do we bring up play?
how do we remember, envision, cultivate, and play in a third space?
Once again, I really think it has to do with a person being willing to be present and show up within themselves, right? Because if you are, especially as adults, play is a thing that can mean a lot of different things to people. But when you're working with little children, I think play is how we learn, right? We're trying to teach them through play. And so often you have to define what play means to you, right? Some people don't value play. They don't feel learning happens in play. And so I think it's always being centered in the notion of what is this thing for me? What does this thing mean? When I say this word, what does that mean for me? And I think to have to have play even exist, you have to have play in your spirit. You have to have a playful spirit. You have to be willing. And I think of play as a place of openness, right? Of exploration, of innovation, of a space where, we're just trying to see what we have in this environment, right? Here in our school, we use the environment as a third teacher. That's, a part of what this whole Reggio Emilia model is about. And so we make our environment a very playful space, a very colorful space, a space where kids can explore so that play can be more organic and not something that we have to set aside, right? And it's okay for us to play too, for us to get dirty, to get on the floor, to do art with the kids. Often when we're doing anything with our kids here, teachers do it too. So when the kids are making an art project, the teacher's right next to them making one for herself. So she's experiencing play right along with them, or art, or whatever it is they're doing. And I think it's rekindling that ability to do play and learn what play is, or re-examine play, right? Because as you get older, you get away from play because you got to work. And work and play doesn't always seem to be the same thing. And so I think having a space or creating a safe space to explore what play means really helps to cultivate play for adults as well as children, and give it authenticity and however it shows up for you. But I guess our society and the way we do education doesn't always make room for that, right? And so we have to be intentional again about, especially as leaders, being intentional with staff saying it's okay for us to play. And how can we use play as a form of learning for whatever thing we're trying to teach?
I think I learned that from you, Angela, when we were teaching, because I was always like, we don't why are you guys talking about this? We have to do this, we have to teach. But I really learned to kind of slow down and remember. I think I knew this initially, but I'd forgotten the space in between, or actually just to have a time that's not scheduled during a work day is a really that's almost the most important time of the day. And I love, Dr. Canton, that you pointed out what play is for each of us might be very different. Sister Solana was our last guest, and she said ceremony is a way that adults play. And I never thought of that before. I never thought of ceremony as a form of play. But then I thought, well, actually, kids do ceremony all the time. Like the way they enter, it amazes me. Even I've been working with kids for a really long time, but I'm still I think it's so cool. Like I was traveling with my goddaughter, and she was 12 at the time, and the kids playing in a pool together. They do this kind of like dance around each other. First they like play near each other, and they slowly start to like make eye contact every now and again. And then one of them will be like, nice handstand. Like they play. That is totally like the way they do ceremony or the way they enter dramatic play. And sometimes they don't pick up on the ceremony that's happening, and they need help to see the things that are not, that you can't see with your eyes, or to hear the things you can't hear with your ears that kids are doing. And then it also made me think, both of our mommies are coming up here in this episode, but they sat with us for our last episode of last season. But the quote that we chose from my mom she said, when we bounce up against somebody else, that's what starts to form our boundaries. Not just the whole right and wrong of things, it's how you stretch and how you learn, how we build our relationships with each other. But I love the idea of play, because play, I feel like, although it's confusing to us if we forgot how to do it, I feel like play is a lower stakes way to kind of bump up against other people. Sometimes there's humor that can come into it if we're kind of in the flow, and the bumping up and even like rough and tumble play, right, is like a way to learn more about ourselves by bumping up against somebody else. And even to be like, in my marriage, like half the time my husband is playing and I'm like, that's not play. Or like vice versa. I'm like, I'm playing right now. Like, he's like, oh, you are? Okay. It's an interesting way to play. But it is, I think it is a nice place for us to kind of bump up against each other, which I hadn't thought of before. So thank you for pointing that individual approach to play out.
I'm giggling because I'm on my way to a trip where I'm going to go learn to surf, I think, and go climb a volcano with my dad. And my dad is the person who I know that has played his whole life. He never got, like, he did have a job with with a boss, and he didn't like that. And so he was like, I'm just going to go make my own business and I'm going to work whenever I want. And gratefully, he is very tapped into his spirituality, and God provided him with work all of the time whenever he needed it when he was raising us. And even to this day, he's still blessed with a lot of work. He doesn't actually do any marketing or promotion of it. People call him and he has work. But he has modeled my whole life how to play and how to sense into. He always says that he's selfish. That's what he's like. I'm just so selfish because I just do what I want to do. And in a lot of ways, it is true. He is those things in the way he describes them. But I think that he models how to care for himself so that the moments that he is with us, or the moments that he can possibly be with us, he's able to fully be himself, or he has like the skills to like regulate his nervous system. Like my dad hates going shopping with us. He doesn't want to go to the mall. He's like, can't you just take me on a hike to the mountains? And we're like, we don't want to do that. Or if I'm home, because we live about 3,000 miles away from each other, if I'm home and he's always outside or I'm always inside, he's like, you want to come outside and like see what I'm working on? And he'll be like putting rocks and mud and like building a waterfall outside for his garden. Or he's also an artist, and he builds houses sometimes and builds spaces. And the last time I was there, he was like, so I don't even know how to describe it, but it's a gazebo that he's now making into like a space that can actually be used for a type of housing potentially. And he had a bunch of leftover materials from a different project that he had worked on. And he was like, so I'm going to like make a collage of roses on this. And he's talking about concrete. and he's talking about marble, and he's going to design it and cut it into the shapes of flowers and roses. And that's going to be the ground that we walk on in this gazebo that will be a housing space at some point.
Mm.
And when and I don't necessarily know why that came to me, but it has arrived. And I think that when we view, it came back, that because he does so much of that work, it sort of allows him to take care of his own nervous system for the rare moments or the few moments that when we're like, Dad, can we go to the mall? Or Dad, do you want to go out to eat with us? That he's like, okay, like I played enough this morning. I can go and like put on these things and be able to show up and like kind of do this thing I really don't want to do, but I want to be near my family. So, okay, I'll go do that thing. So I think like play, if we really look at the way children do it, it's sort of them taking care of themselves to be able to like get in the car ride that they're going to totally hate or sit down for lunch because like now they have to like sit to do lunch or sit to do circle time or like get up in a line and like have to wait for the bathroom or something. Those are the things that have come up and as I think more deeply about how we think of play outside of what we've sort of put it into. I think play has been put a lot into these boxes of what it should look like.
Yeah.
And you've brought up the essence of play very beautifully. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Angela, maybe your dad came in just now because our third question is about earth rhythms. And I always think of your dad because that seems to be something that he's very
this is true.
Connected or feels, I guess, maybe it's the right word. So our question is, how do connecting with earth rhythms and caring for ourselves and each other help us in the processes of discernment that we were talking about earlier? And I'm so curious because we talked to Dr. Lee in our first episode and he's in the city context and you are as well. So I'm so curious to hear how you might talk about.
Yeah. So I think creation is so important to growth, right? I think we're all connected. And so one of the things intentionally about our school that I did in looking for a space, when I finally decided we were going to open this school, and I went to some of my religious leaders and said, I need a space in Harlem. Like a lot of the churches own the buildings and things. But I was intentional about making sure my school was next to a park because my kids needed to be able to experience the earth. Right, they needed to have trees and soil and be able to ground themselves if they need to. And so we're across the street from a park, and we needed to connect with other forms of life in different ways. And so, having my kids go out twice a day. We go to the park twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. That's how they connect. One of my teachers loved trees. And so in our community, we had a tree that was dying and because of a storm, I think it got struck by lightning or something, but it fell down. And for 2 months, the kids visit this tree that was injured and they learned about the bark and they learned about the leaves and, what's going to happen to the stump once they cut it down and will the roots still be alive and all that. So, learning about the earth and connecting with the earth is important to our existence. In my office, I have fish, right? I have fish that sit on my desk. And so the kids come in, can we feed the fish today? So, in every classroom, we try to have children adopt a pet. They choose something. Fish, we have ants, we had worms, the things that the Department of Health allow us to have.
Yeah, right.
I really want to get a service dog, but I haven't figured out how I'm going to pull that off yet. But we understand that life is about all of creation and not just about human beings and the things we do. And so we try to incorporate, the earth and the forms of life in different ways and just our learning activities, caring for the earth. We go out to the park every day so the kids get to run in the park and play. Sometimes we go for a walk, our miracle walk. It's called our miracle walk in the morning, and we look at the miracles of our community, right? And so they walk around the community just to see what's happening, the trees, the birds, and that usually happens early in the morning. And so we call it our morning miracle walk. And we just look at creation and what it's doing. And then they talk about it and they come back and share and experience it. So that was intentional, picking a school next to a park. And we have a lot of rocks and boulders in our park. So they also collect the rocks sometimes and bring the rocks back and talk about those things. So I think it's important. It's important for kids to, at an early age, respect their environment, all of it, and not just consume it, but also take care of it. And so in our rooms, we have plants, we have animals of some sort. Ant farms. My 2-year-old did an ant farm. Another group did worms. And so I think starting very young, teaching kids about the importance of the earth and taking care of it helps them also thrive, right? And so that's how I see that. It's very much we're very much connected to it. And how we care for it is important. But kids need to understand that young. I don't think you gain that overnight.
Yeah. I enjoyed when I had a program in my home. It was just me and 6 kiddos. And that was actually the easiest time for me to be present with them about all the things they noticed. We would go walking through the neighborhood and they noticed every new flower that bloomed, and they noticed every tiny creature that I might never have noticed in my own neighborhood. And we fed the birds. So they wanted, if there was a new type of bird coming to the feeder, they noticed that it was a new, and even there's something about toddler vision that is they see the tiniest little things 30 feet away that I'm wait, what are you looking at? It's just that was one of my favorite things about working with that multi-age group, because the way they see things is even different and they see the things that change on a daily basis. And they ate all of my raspberries because they couldn't.
Well, we had some wild strawberries growing up, and so over the summer they would go up to the patches to see how many more grew. And so I used to tell my teacher, they cannot eat the wild strawberries. I don't want to hear their parents. Right. We can have strawberries back at the building, but you can let them go see it and touch it and, all that kind of stuff. So I get that.
Right. We had in my classroom, we had a little frog. Frog inside in the fish tank. And I don't know if it was a she, but she survived the entire academic school year with toddlers who banged on the wall and put blocks around her and stuff. And I had never thought of I've always liked having, I think one year I had a terrarium, not a terrarium. Yeah, dirt and earthworms and grubs underground in one of my classrooms. But I never thought how that was a type of nature in a classroom. I always really think of nature as an outside thing, but but actually no, how I always had them because we have to learn to take care of things, other living things was kind of how I thought about it. But I never thought about it no, but that's nature in your classroom, even though it's in a box or in a cage or in its space, right? But yeah, okay. I'm appreciating the reframe of it because I never thought about it as nature in my classroom. So
yeah,
nice. Thank you for that. Thank you. This has been so wonderful.
Well, I'm glad I could be of support. And thank you guys for the opportunity to share. We're really trying to change early childhood education here in New York City. So it's new for us. We're allowing God, the universe, our ancestors to direct our judgment. And, some days are good days, other days we're struggling through. But I think it's important. It's important work that needs to be done. And our little people need good people. And so my prayers have been, God, yes, there is a shortage of educators in the world, but move on the hearts of humanity and let people see that they can fundamentally bless and heal and impact lives by teaching. And so, and help our universities become more in tune to that human side of life and not just the rigidity of just making sure you dot your I's and cross your T's. That is more to life than that, right? Learning how to live between the lines is what I always say to my staff. We got to learn how to live between the lines and not always on the lines, right? So, yeah, well, this was great. I thank you guys for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Canton, and also to our listeners. Thanks for listening. To keep the conversation going and for monthly reflection prompts related to each episode, sign up for our mailing list.
If you want to play with us in real time, exploring the ideas in this episode, please come to the next Campfire Chat. We look forward to our next sacred conversation with you.
Check out the show notes for details.